Hi, welcome back to West Coast Geeks. I'm your host, Joaquin. How we doing, people? So for those of you who are new to the channel, I got my boy Eric with me.
What's up, guys?
If you've been watching the series, you should be expecting Eric with me. So we're taking a break from the monster manuals for a quick second because this topic is really important to the history of D&D and what was going on in the 1980s. So when that's why it's entitled, that's why it's titled "When Dungeons and Dragons Caused a Satanic Panic." This event helped the game soar to record sales and popularity. All right, here we go. All right, the disappearance of James Egbert caused a small panic. In 1979, James Egbert disappeared and his family hired a private investigator named William Deere. He discovered Egbert and his friends enjoyed playing D&D in the steam tunnels beneath the university. The detective hired by Egbert's parents wrongfully concluded that their son had been playing the game in the steam tunnels when he disappeared. A press conference was given by the detective, William Deere, which led to a national attention on the Egbert's case and D&D per National Library of Scotland. Many began to blame the role-playing game. What really happened? Egbert was depressed and had left his dorm to attempt suicide in the steam tunnels. Days later, he left for Louisiana and began working in an oil field. When he realized his disappearance was getting national attention, he turned himself in. Deere met him and escorted him back to his parents. Egbert's case was referred to the media as the steam tunnel incident. According to Deere, Egbert revealed that he was secretly gay. Now, remember, this is in the 80s, people. And chronically, chronically depressed. Sadly, Edgar did commit suicide a couple of years later. So, do you remember even hearing about any of this, or is that
I
way
remember
beyond?
not as it happened, but I remember hearing about it afterwards. And actually, he died within that year, or
No,
within the next year. He shot himself.
in
He
a
tried to
couple of
kill himself
years.
again. Yeah, he tried to kill himself again when he went to New Orleans. He was really just messed up and had a lot of issues and couldn't get any help.
Yep.
But because they tied the game, him possibly playing the game, and there were a lot of people that saying he was at the Gen Con that year. I think it was Gen Con 12 or something like that. But yeah, there was all kinds of stuff that was going on. But yeah, he was just a really troubled kid, and they
And
just
and it's
trying
a
to explain
shame.
it
Look at this
away.
guy, man. It's
Yeah, he's
like
just a kid.
he was, a lot of kids back then who felt out of place did commit suicide. I mean, suicide's still a thing we deal with now in high
Hmm.
numbers, a lot higher than people would expect. All right.
Or admit.
So, or admit, thank you. So, these are the images just off the Monster Manual. So, the Monster Manual and the prior publications of the deities and demigods, I never got to look at any of those books. Did you, Eric?
Hmm.
So,
Deities and demigods and all that back
yeah,
in the day. Yeah,
yeah, the
yeah.
chainmail and all that. See, I never got to look at
Yep.
those images. But even if they didn't even have those images, these images did not make it better. And these are just the ones I
Yeah,
just popped up really quick.
this didn't help their case.
No, on top of the other, demonic images, we had like the
Dissipator and
night
all those
hags
guys.
and all this stuff.
Hmm.
And so, this would helped. This would help fuel it. And now, mazes and
Man.
monsters. So I'm gonna read this real quick, and then Eric's gonna go all into detail. He's been looking forward to this all week. So here we go.
Let's
Mazes and
go.
monsters. In 1981, um, Rona
Jaffe.
Jaffe,
Jaffe, yeah.
yeah, Jaffe, wrote a novel, Mazes and Monsters, which focused on the group of college students who began to play role-playing games similar to Dungeons and Dragons. One of the students became obsessed with the game and had a psychotic break, nearly killing someone he believed is a monster from the realm he believes to be on a quest. Excuse me. The book is loosely based on the steam tunnel incident. To make matters more interesting, CBS adapted the novel for a made-for-TV screenplay and aired to production in a primetime slot on December 28th, 1982. The movie featured veteran actor Murphy Hamilton, the mayor in Jaws, who played a cop that convinced that a role-playing game can be responsible for murder. Dun dun
Mm-hmm.
dun.
Yeah.
Also in the movie are Chris Makepeace, Vamp, and My Bodyguard, and a
Yeah.
26-year-old Tom Hanks. That's what people mostly
Yeah.
remember. The
His one of
later
his first like
played
main
two.
roles.
Yep. The later played two college students who, like Jaffe's novel, gets a little too wrapped up in playing a certain role-playing game in caves near the university. All right, Eric, take us away.
All right. So this movie, okay, first of all, you gotta remember Ramona Jaffe was known for kind of sensationalist novels, kind of like that, to say the least. She also did a bunch of other work, but this was really what the first time I ever heard of her. And I've read a lot as in a youth and that, but the first time I ever heard it was because of stuff like this. So they wanted to kind of there was this whole thing in the early 80s with the Satanic Panic and everything, and it's like everybody wanted to get on the bandwagon. It was the talk shows, it was people writing books, it was all over the magazines, it was Donahue and Sally Jesse and all this places. Well, and when they did this movie, they took it, and like you said earlier, they based a lot of it. So the part where they go in, well, okay, let's start from the beginning. They first introduce these kids. All these kids have a problem. The one of the blonde, I forget the guy's name. I forget his name, but the blonde guy in the picture, the guy in the back, he's trying to please his father. His father's you know, never been proud of him or whatever, and he wants to go and make computer games, and his dad looks down on it. And the young kid with the sword, his mother is all consumed with her work and ignores the kid, so the kid just has his little bird for a friend. The girl is bouncing from they portray her as bouncing from man to man and coming off a bad breakup and all this other stuff. And of course, Tom Hanks, they don't really say what's wrong with him. They just his parents don't want him playing the game as they drop him off for school. So these kids get together and they go to school and they end up playing the game together. So the kid with the sword, I forget his name. I just watched this movie too
Yep.
again. So his character dies in the campaign. So he's like, I'm gonna up the ante. How about we play for real? What we would call now LARPing, live action role playing. They didn't really have a name for it back then. So he's like, well, I found these caverns and I mapped them out. Why don't we play in there for real and kind of thing? And they took that. That's pretty much from the James Dallas Egbert kind of scenario with the caverns and near the college and all that other kind of stuff. So they play in there, and then Tom Hanks, he's having that psychotic break, and he starts to believe that he is his character.
A cleric.
And through all these dreams and visions or whatever he's having, he has received some kind of notice that he's looking for the Great Hall. Now, Hall was his brother who went to New York earlier and mysteriously disappeared. They never did quite say what happened to him.
I know, so poorly written, but go on.
Yeah, it was so bad, dude. Like even trying to watch, I'm like, what the hell is going on, dude? But it was 81 written on some sensationalist novels, so there wasn't a whole lot. And it's funny because there's a lot of recognizable actors in that movie.
Oh yeah, I mean the star was Chris Makepeace for Vamp and My Bodyguard. That was the
Yeah,
star
I
of
thought he
that.
looked familiar. It had been a while. I remember
Yeah.
Vamp, and vaguely My Bodyguard, but yeah, there was a bunch of 80s people in there.
Hmm.
Even the kid, I don't remember what he was, but
Yeah.
So yeah, so the kids go to the cops and they don't admit playing the game because again, the big stigma and everybody thinks you're a weirdo if you play the game. So they lie to the authorities and say, "Oh, he was playing with another group, but we heard they were in the cave." So then the reporters go to the cave, the cops go to the cave, the one it's funny if you guys are familiar with Seinfeld, the episode where over the library card. It's very like done over the top, the detective scene. And that's literally like this scene when he's questioning all these kids. It's just literally over the top. And he's like, oh, maybe he's murdered somebody, or is he doing drugs? Is he a doper? Like all these weird like 1940s slang words
Yeah,
being
reefer
thrown out
madness
there.
type references.
Yeah, because it's a bad game and it's just really like kind of he uses the term slipped into the game like that's some common thing. They made it seem that this kind of stuff happening is so common that there's a term for it, which I never heard anything like that when I
No.
played. And they refer to the game as dangerous, and like I said, the detectives and police are assuming that he did drugs and he drank, and that Mazes of Monsters, what he says, is a far out game, claiming it's a game of murder and violence, and that it's real. Like, that's what's weird. Like, the authorities, they're like, oh, it's only a game. The kids are like, oh, it's only a game, and then the cops like, is it? Kind of throwing that doubt in there.
Yeah. So
But yeah, so they
basically,
go and they check these. Oh, go ahead.
oh no, I was gonna say. So basically, this is the premise. This is you can see that the hysteria is slowly building up. All right, Eric, wrap it
Yes.
up on this with any other.
All right. So after all that, they get a Tom Hanks is like, I got to go to the two towers, and everybody thinks it's Tolkien. Well, they're near New York, so it's the two towers, the World Trade Centers. So in the end, the kids try and find him, and they find him in the World Trade Center. He's gonna jump off. He's like, oh, I have spells, I can fly. And then they kind of like LARP with him, and they're like, no, I'm the maze master and I have other control, and you don't have spell points to cast that spell, like trying to totally get into his psyche because they know that he's lost it. So he's rescued from the top of the Twin Towers, and 3 months later, they show the other kids who quit the game are doing like one kid, he's the head of the art direction.
Yeah,
Another kid,
totally. Just like
yeah,
D
remember
and
that?
D's like they were hooked on heroin. Now they cleaned up their
Exactly,
life.
dude. Like it's a 3 month Betty Ford stay, and they're all off the game.
Yeah.
And the one guy's opening up his new software firm, and the other girl's writing a book, which meanwhile, throughout the whole movie, a book is never mentioned. Her
Yeah.
writing a book is never mentioned. So yeah, so they go to visit Tom Hanks, and he's at his rich parents' house, and he's totally just spaced out, totally out of his mind, and he believes that he's Pardieu, his character. And he mentions, oh, there's evil in the forest, so that his friends go with him to help him slay the evil, kind of play along because he's totally lost his marbles. And like literally the last words of that movie is the girl like giving an epilogue, and she's like, and so we spent the day with him, and it was the death of hope and the loss of our friend. Like, just this total like
I know.
downer ending, like the death of hope. Like, really? That's what you're gonna end this with?
The
It's
death
like,
of
it's
hope,
literally to
dude.
scare any
Woo!
child away from this shit. Anybody.
Yeah. All right, so
Fucking nuts,
that
dude.
was Mazes and Monsters, dude. So
Yeah.
yeah, I let Eric watch the movie, and I didn't let him, but he told me he was gonna
Let
watch the
him.
movie. I'm
Sounds
like,
allowed.
cool, cool, cool. You got this. All right. So after this, or during this time, Pulling's mother's
Hmm.
forms bothered about Dungeons and Dragons bad. Uh, she's
Oh,
at this point.
before you get
She's
into this,
what?
wait, before you get into this article, so this lady Pulling
Yeah,
also Patricia Pulling had ties with Rona Jaffe, the lady who wrote Mazes of Monsters.
that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. So they were kind of in on all this stuff.
Yeah, because
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
so Irving Pulling's mother, Patricia, formed bothered about Dungeons and Dragons bad. In 1983, she recruited psychiatrist Tom Braddock, the director of National Coalition on TV Violence (NCTV), to aid her in joining forces with severally loose organization anti-D&D groups led by Christian fundamentalists per Journal of
Oh
Religion and Popular
yeah, the
Culture.
religious right.
Psychologists today report that the newly formed BAD believed that D&D was leading the influence in bringing the youth over to Satan.
Really leading the influence over heavy metal. Now that's some shit.
Wait, we're not there yet. That's why. Like, I always have to show Eric what we're doing. I'm like, look, I have everything planned out. Don't jump ahead.
I get excited.
All right. So here's some more articles. So, and this is a real newspaper right here.
Yeah.
Like this is legit right here. I was like, I have to add this. The helplines. Dungeons and Dragons calls moral conflicts, protests, even jam. I mean, evangelists. No, say that for me, Eric.
Evangelist.
Yeah,
Evangelist.
evangelists. That's it. See
Yeah.
the game as a front for demon worship. So all these different groups are
Oh,
like now
Satanic Panic.
combining forces, and I think like I'll do like little highlight is so she's on the air constantly, but I'll go the third highlight because we've crossed over most of the other two. Pulling co-authored the book The Devil's Web, who
Yeah.
is stalking your children for Satan, published in August of 1989. That's how far this
Hmm.
thing has been. This thing went on for like a decade, and we're gonna get further into that. The book
Yeah.
makes no distinction between H.P. Lovecraft's fictional Necromonicon and the Simon Necromonicon. A realization of the book, one portion of the book urges police officers to open interrogations of suspect teenage occultists with the question: have you read the Necronomicon, or are you familiar with it? Like, I
Asking me?
was like, that was crazy.
Yeah.
And then it's like, as the popularity of Dungeons and Dragons and other role playing games increased, Pulling's views and the statements were increasingly called into question. For example, she once told a newspaper reporter that 8% of people living in Richmond, Virginia were Satanists. She had arrived at that figure, she explained, by estimating that 4% adults and 4% of teenagers were involved in Satanism, adding them together as 8%. When the reporter
It's math.
informed her mathematically that was 4%, not 8%, she claimed that it did not matter because even at 8% was a conservative figure. So at this point, she's just, pulling
Yeah.
numbers.
Math with the F.
Yeah.
Math.
Oh, now what I do? What did I do? Oops. Sorry about that
And
technical
so
glitch.
that
That's
devil
staying in
worship.
there. I don't edit stuff like that out. I don't care, people. All right. By 1980, TSR sales were at 8.7 million.
Whew.
That in the 80s, people, was crazy. All right,
Free
hold on.
internet.
Hold
Free.
on. What? Okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure it was capturing the full screen and I didn't jack it up.
Yeah.
I still gotta figure out a way to get rid of that lower bar. Please leave that in the description for OBS. Thank you.
Comments.
So, the TOR reports that during the aftermath of the steam tunnel incident, sales of D&D manuals quadrupled. According to CBR, despite Patricia's pulling and Bad trying their best to convince the world that playing D&D and listening to heavy metal was a pathway to Satan himself, people, sales of the games continue to soar throughout the controversy. One might argue that the widespread campaign that Pulling and her cohorts engaged in only led to a widespread curiosity about the game, resulting in more
Yeah.
manuals being sold. The popularity of D&D eventually spilled over into other facets of popular culture, inspiring video games, board games, and a whole host of props and figures you could play with the original game with. Fans of the games were also introduced to countless novels based on the realms and characters, D&D comics, posters, and eventually a feature film. It might be safe to assume that Pulling and Bad's war on D&D actually helped it. It was
Yeah.
the
I mean, that's.
best promotion
Yeah.
that TSR ever could have gotten.
And I mean, if you remember, like TSR really didn't fight this. They were like, they gave like a nominal amount of pushback, but it's not like there were lawsuits or anything like that. Once they saw how this was affecting sales, they were just like, I don't remember, at least I don't remember hearing anything like that. I've never come across anything.
I remember at one point, because I learned to play the game in Texas with my
Mhm.
friend and his older brother. And for those of you, you've heard that story, so quick recap in the sense of, at one point, I think a neighbor noticed that we were playing Dungeons and Dragons, some of the kids in on the street, and
Mhm.
she told my mom, she's like, "Well, I heard that this game was bad
Yeah.
and led to devil
You're in
worship,"
Texas
and
too.
so my mom was like, "No, my husband looked into it." And so, for those who you don't know, which is pretty much everybody listening to the video, practically, my father was an attorney at the time. I say was because he, God rest his soul, passed away 4 years. But at the time, he looked into it. As soon as all that stuff started coming out, I found out later he looked into it. And he looked at it and goes, "It's just a fantasy game. And if it's encouraging my son to
Yeah.
draw and, more important, read, because if you
Yeah.
gave me something with D&D, I read it. I may not have understood
Right?
everything because I was 10 years old, but I read it." And so he was just like, "I don't have an issue with it." So, most parents, I think, came to that conclusion. Just, you get the fanatics out there that go crazy.
Mhm. Yeah, I
Um,
think mine was mostly when I got into it is because of my uncles.
yeah,
And even though they were like, really like Mexican Catholic, and I know my grandmother didn't care for the heavy metal, but
yeah,
I don't think they really had an opinion on the D&D. And my parents looked at it like, if my uncles were playing and getting me into the game, it couldn't be that bad. At least it was family. It
yeah,
wasn't like I was sneaking off and playing on in in some sewer or something.
yeah. You weren't in the
So I
sewers or
never really had a problem playing with it as far as my parents went.
so. As you can see here, the D&D controversy was the subjects of
Hmm.
1985, 60
Yep,
minutes. Okay, people.
Mr. Ed
For,
Bradley.
so for those people who don't really pay attention to the news, for the younger people, back in the 80s, 90s, and even the early 2000s, 60 Minutes was a big show. It's okay now as far as like
Yeah, I didn't even know
popularity.
if it was still going.
Yeah, it's okay with its popularity, but it's always remained as factual that they can like look up. So for them to come in and be like, "What the hell is going on?" 5 years
They're gonna
later,
jump on the wagon.
yeah, that's to show you how big it really did spread. So
Yeah, like it
in
was huge, man.
1985, the award-winning 60-minute show aired a special broadcast devoted to D&D, hosted by Ed Bradley. The show opened by stating that a popular game with children was believed by some adults to cause suicide and murder. Appearing on the program were Patricia Pulling and Thomas Radrick, who claimed the game was
Radecki.
responsible for the deaths of 28 people. Via
Yeah, I wouldn't.
National Liberty Library of Scotland, Bradley also interviewed a visible, frustrated Gygax who pulled no punches when
Yep.
talking about those parents who were behind the hysteria. And I love this line. He states,
Yeah.
"This is make believe. No one is martyred. There is no violence there. To use an analogy, what? How do you pronounce that?
Analogy.
Analogy. That's it.
Yeah.
Analogy with another game. Who is bankrupted by a game of Monopoly? No one is. The money isn't real. There is no link, except perhaps in the mind of those people who are looking desperately for any other cause than their own failure as a parent. Dude,
Yeah, turn it
that
back
was
on
like a
them.
knockout punch he delivered at
Yeah,
the end, dude.
like that, Tipper Gore.
Yeah, so we got that going on. We're right now, we're in the middle of the 80s. Then, during all of
Oh, there's my
this,
man.
now
There's my
Congress has
man.
been getting involved.
Yup.
And the controversy surrounding D&D in the 1980s was part of a satanic panic. So it just wasn't D&D. It was
Yeah,
also rock and
music.
roll music.
Yup.
Like everything was just
Comic
being
books.
lumped into it.
Yup.
And they just set their sights. It's like,
Comic books like Spawn,
yeah,
even though that was a little bit later, but yeah,
yeah.
80s and 90s.
So when you study the history surrounding the D&D controversy of the 80s and the early 90s, it's easy to see that it fits nicely with the satanic panic the United States was experiencing at the time. Organizations like BAD pointed that role-playing games with a devilish brush claimed the games had demonic influences behind it. D&D wasn't the only target of religious groups and paranoid's parent. Satanic Panic created a negative focus on numerous musicians, films, books, comics, and other forms of media. But that isn't where the tragedy lays. The panic, pioneered by the misguided mental health professionals, began with psychiatrist and author Lawrence Pazier released
Asner?
Michael or Michelle Remembers an allegory. No, what is that? An alleged true story
Yeah.
of satanic rituals abuse that was revealed throughout the years of the hypnotherapy. Per the National Post, the book set off a wave of paranoia. Suddenly, there were hundreds of Michelles coming
Yeah.
forward. That's the early
Yep.
Karen people coming forward with their own abuse, triggering what mental health professionals would later call false memory syndrome. With so many people believing that there were underground of Satan cults abusing their kids, it's no wonder that so many were falsely accused of ritual abuse. Doctors, teachers, preschools, employees, and others were accused of a nationwide witch hunt. Some convinced with zero physical evidence. In 1995, Virginia Commonwealth University published a report stating that virtual no evidence was discovered to support the allegation of a satanic cult activity. And I also want to say that it was during that time when you had that daycare being accused,
McMartin.
yeah,
Yep.
of
The
the same.
McMartin preschool.
Yep.
Yep. Yeah,
I forget
that
who
was a
did.
bunch of shit.
Yeah, I forget who did a really good series on it, but
There was a few of them that did some really good series, but unfortunately, all that shit was done way after it destroyed all these people's lives.
yeah.
That guy just went through a whole bunch of shit. There was I know which one you're talking about. Who's the guy that played Elliot in ET? I
Oh, I
forget
know
his
who you're
name.
talking about. Yeah,
That
there's one of them
actor
with
is the
him.
one that played the McMartin guy.
Yeah.
And I remember watching that McMartin thing. It was literally a modern day Salem witch
Witch
hunt,
hunt.
dude.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
you've
it
got
was
all
nuts.
this is the 80s, okay? So those of us who
Yeah,
lived it, most of us never even experienced any of this. It was just kind of like
yeah.
a passing flash of history.
I
But,
remember the
for
McMartin.
some other people, as you can see, like, heavy metal and other people, this was real. Like, you even got a picture of Geraldo and devil worship. And,
Dude, I remember Geraldo's. I used to watch the Geraldo show, dude.
yeah, so did I.
It was nuts, dude. Like he always had white supremacists and devil worshippers on his show. Like that
Yeah,
was the shit. You could almost guarantee weekly one of those guys on
yeah.
there.
It's called ratings. All
Yep.
right, here we
He
go.
got
And
busted
then there
nose.
was this
This
bright
lovely show.
light in all of our lives if you grew up then. Dungeons and
Yep.
Dragons, the cartoon. And then there was this Dungeons and Dragons, an American animation television series based on TSR Dungeons and Dragons role playing game. A co production of Marvel Productions and TSR, the show originally ran from 1983 through 1985 for 3 seasons on CBS for a total of 27 episodes. It always felt longer.
Hmm.
The Japanese company Toei Animation, or Toei, did the animation for the series. I love Japanese animation, they always do a good job. The show focused on a group of 6 friends who are transported into a fantasy realm and follow their adventurers as they try to find a way home with the help of the guide of the dungeon master while combating an evil wizard. A final
Damn
unproduced
wizard.
episode would have served as both conclusion to the story as well as reimagined of the show had the series been picked up for a 4th season. However, the show was canceled before the episode was made. The script has since been published
Boo.
online and performed as an audio drama as a special feature of the BCI Eclipse DVD edition of the series.
I did not know that. I did not know that there was an audio drama of that.
Oh
That
yeah,
would have
I
been cool.
watched it. I think somebody
Did
even
you?
animated it too. They took the
Oh
script
man,
and they
that would have
animated it.
been cool. Yeah, that was a great cartoon, man. I remember I used to get teased because my name is Eric and the Cavalier's name was Eric, and that guy was a punk bitch. So they would always be like, "Oh, Eric the Cavalier." I was like, "Man, forget you guys."
Yeah, so this was the bright spot. You know, TSR is doing good in sales. Dungeons and Dragons is popular. The cartoon came out and helped stabilize it. It's not demons and devils. I mean, that's what they wanted to call it, pretty much. And
Right? I
so,
know. Notice demons and devils were never in the series either.
nope, we're gonna get all that. So I gotta keep Eric in line. It's like, don't give
Yeah,
out stuff till we get there.
that's right.
TSR removed satanic monsters from the game. This is now second edition.
Sons of
Even though
bitches.
TSR was experiencing record sales during the Satanic Panic years, the company decides to go into damage control mode to be in the safe side. Frank Metzer,
Yeah.
who helped design several manuals of the game, when Gary Gygax, was put in the position of PR and spokesperson. He appeared on talk shows combating the unwanted fears some members of the public had about D&D. He appeared on radio and TV talk shows, including a 1981 appearance of Good Morning America. His message was simple. Metzer was insistent on the fact that D&D was entirely fiction. The magic and the spells cast in the game by the players were not real and were merely a part of an imaginary gameplay. He discussed the role-playing game had a strong moral component to them, where the players were battling evil. To placate some religious groups, TSR removed some of the images and monsters from their manual by the time the new edition of the game was released in 1989.
Oh,
But as the country was in the middle of the Satanic Panic era, it's arguably that distinctive themselves from some perceived evil illustration was a moot point.
Yeah, D and
So
D was already caught up in it.
yeah, so
It
case
was
example, Player's Handbook doesn't
nope,
have a demon on there. Dungeon
nope,
Master's Guide doesn't have a demon figure. Monster Manual, you kind of have to go look for it.
right?
So
Yeah, it was really, and they say a lot of people think the Satanic Panic. I mean, that thing lasted a good 10, 15 years. Like it
about
wasn't as
10. It was
bad as it
hardcore
was in
10.
the mid '80s. But even like they said, into the late '80s, early '90s, that religious right, they were
Excuse me.
really super. Anything that came out was looked under a microscope.
No, and that's and so they TSR is like, okay, we're starting to change.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. The polling report was published in the 1990s. By the early 1990s, the United States was beginning to get a little message fatigue by the imagined dangers of D&D. Helped kicking this new attitude off with the publication of the polling report by avid gamer and D&D enthusiast Michael Stackpole. BBC's news reports that Stackpole noted that many errors and statistics made by partition pooling and bad throughout their public campaign against the game. The report cited instances of professional credentials that have been exaggerated or falsified their claims, including Pooling's assertion that she was an expert in any way.
Yes.
RPG Studies had the report in its entirety. In the report, Stackpole accused Pooling of giving false and misleading information to the police officers that attended cult crime seminars and of giving equally false and misleading information to school districts. The Pooling report also cited a number of times that Pooling claimed D&D is responsible for crime, but offers no evidence the game really had anything to do with it. The Pooling report began to erode, and credibility of D&D critics like Pooling and Tom and graduates began to light that the supposed experts might not really have a grasp on what was happening.
The original Karen.
Yeah, pretty much. Started it
Yeah.
all.
She was. Yeah.
All right, so now we got to the wrap up, people. The game still enjoys popularity today. You're
I mean,
watching,
more than ever, really. I
yeah,
mean, if you really think about it, you have Stranger Things here, and that's a huge thing. But you also have shit like Critical Role, which is massive, and they've moved on to an animated series, which is hilarious on Amazon. It's really good. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but it's really cool. I'm not a big fan of watching 3-hour sessions of somebody else play. I'm not really familiar with their stuff, but there's a that show's really good. And there's a lot of other people, you got D&D Beyond with the technological capabilities that we have today. D&D is larger than it's ever been.
yeah. So, the little things that I was able to find. So, COVID-19 helped, but
Mm.
but the what they're saying was the biggest jump, which is why I chose this last photo for or image for our video. Stranger Things helped the game jump big time.
Mhm.
And because of that, people like Matt Mercer and Critical Role and other groups were able to fuel like what is D&D. But it's Critical Role who was able to take it a step further,
Yeah.
and it's because you've got all voice actors and actresses playing D&D.
Yeah.
Because if you watch a normal D&D game,
It's
you know,
boring as
it
shit,
it is. Most of the time it is. You're just waiting for that one little clip that's
right?
funny, but other than that, it is, like even our games are only fun to us because we're the ones playing it.
Yeah, because we're in it. Yeah, that's what I said. Watching other people play for 3 hours, not my idea of fun.
No, but some people like it, and
Yeah.
that's cool. Um, so that is it. That's the wrap up, people.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it's some crazy times, but they did help generate popularity in Dungeons and Dragons where it probably wouldn't have existed. I'm not going to say that it still wouldn't have taken off and made it big, but
It
the
definitely
Satanic
helped
Panic
in a
really
weird
helped.
way.
All right, so I told Eric I wanted to keep this video to around 30 minutes. We're at 34. So with that, people, final thoughts, Eric?
Yeah, I love Vecna.
Yeah, Vecna's cool. All
Vecna's
right,
dope.
people, I hope you enjoyed this video. No, next up is the letter D in the Monster Manual review.
Oh yeah.
Don't miss that video, baby. Catch you later.
Bye guys.